today I will be doing a video on Ratched. This show is supposed to take place before One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest. When I first heard about it, I thought Nurse Ratched was supposed to be a younger version of the nurse from the movie. So I immediately thought Sarah Paulson was too old, but I didn't know that Cuckoo Nest took place in the 50s and not in the 70s when the movie was released. And the TV show is supposed to take place in the 40s. The first episode starts out with a bunch of priests who live in the same house. A man comes to the front door asking for help and finesses his way inside because of the bad weather. Finn Whitrock plays the stranger, and I don't think he's a good actor. His performance was way too over the top. This could have been a really scary scene, but because of him, it felt like a slasher soap opera on the verge of being a parody. The episode then switches over to Nurse Ratched trying to get a job at a mental hospital. This is just a personal nitpick, but the show is very colorful, almost to the point where it feels artificial. It feels like a movie set. It doesn't feel like a real place. It has a Alice in Wonderland aesthetic going on. It's very distracting, and the hospital looks more like a hotel, which is a shame because the writing is pretty good. The plot is passable so far. But yeah, my biggest issue is mostly just the set design and the actual hospital itself. It's very ugly, but also very colorful, and I just personally don't like it. My favorite character by far is Judy Davis, who plays Nurse Betsy. She's butting heads with Sarah Paulson's character right off the bat. As soon as she showed up, it felt like the show got an adrenaline shot. She was a breath of fresh air. Moving on to episode 2. This episode introduces lobotomy. There are 2 scenes that show explicit lobotomies, and it was stomach churning. We also get into another feud between Ratched and Betsy, which was my favorite scene. It just shows that catty high school bullying doesn't have an age limit. We are also introduced to lesbianism, and a character is taken to a gay bar. I thought this was a bit too heavy handed in the sexuality, especially since there was already talks of this involving the lobotomy scenes. It felt like an agenda, if anything else. And it starts to get to a point where it feels like an ongoing joke. Moving on to episode 3, we're introduced to Sharon Stone, who plays Lenore Osgood. She is a mother of someone who was a victim of malpractice, and she wants revenge on one of the staff members that works at the mental institution. And her performance was absolutely terrible. She is straight up trying to copy Jessica Lange, and she's coming off as like a cartoonish caricature version of Cruella de Vil instead. It is so cringy to watch. Her son, who is the victim of malpractice, is basically a copy of Dandy from American Horror Story's Freak Show. He's spoiled by his mother and he has violent tendencies. I think I enjoyed this episode a little bit more than the first 2 because there were more interesting scenes. This show is very over the top, and I've come to accept that, and the outlandish costumes and the not so great acting. With Ryan Murphy, that's just his style, and I just have to tolerate it for what it is. One thing that absolutely made no sense, though, was the interracial couple who were only married to each other to hide their sexuality. In what universe would it have been possible for a black man to marry a white woman in 1947? It's almost like they were hinting that straight black people have more rights than gays, which is BS. And not only were these 2 married, but they were very successful, and they were only married to each other to stay successful and to have a good reputation, which blew my mind because, again, it's a black man and a white woman. How would that ever be accepted in 1947? Moving on to episode 4, This was the least interesting episode. Basically, a nurse hooks up with a psycho patient, and there's a very uncomfortable sex scene that does have some pretty good humor, I'll admit that, but it was still very uncomfortable to watch. And then there's another storyline involving Nurse Ratched hooking up with a hitman that's staying in the same motel as her. It doesn't really pick up until the last 20 minutes. It had some really good heart racing thrills, and it reminded me a lot of American Horror Story Asylum, so it did get me excited for the next episode. Moving on to episode 5. Oh my god. This starts out with a very goofy performance by a new character with multiple personalities. I've never seen anyone do a convincing performance involving a character with this condition. It always looks fake, and the acting was just so bad. And this is the first black female character on the show, and it was really disappointing. And she automatically really irritated me. I think she is a good actress. She's just not good at doing the whole multiple personality thing. And again, I've never seen an actor be able to pull it off. But when she's acting normal, she does give a good performance. A good chunk of the episode deals with hypnosis and trying to cure the person with multiple personalities. It also deals with a dance that takes place at the hospital with all the patients and the employees. And I was super confused. Is this prom night or something? Not gonna lie, this episode was boring. I wasn't moved by any of it, although the ending was pretty shocking and did make up for it. Although it did take a hell of a long time to get there. Moving on to episode 6. This deals with a hospital inmate and a nurse in a relationship who are spending time together. And we also hear details about the childhood of Nurse Ratched. This is one of the strongest episodes, in my opinion. It was interesting from beginning to end, and I can't say that for the previous episodes. And ironically, it took place nowhere near the hospital. I'm starting to think the hospital setting is one of the weakest points of the show, sadly. I'm not a Sarah Paulson fan, but she gives a great performance. Moving on to episode 7. I can't get into much details about this episode because it does have a lot of spoilers, but it does involve women teaming up together against men. Any man that did a woman wrong on this show gets what's coming to him. Entertainment wise, it was good enough to keep my attention, but I did start to lose interest in what was happening. By far, the most annoying character on the show was Charlotte. The acting was just so awful. It was so over the top. It was grating. I ended up getting a migraine, and I considered shutting it off or fast forwarding through her parts because it was just so awful. Having to sit through her hissy fits. And I'm wondering, like, when is she gonna get killed off? Like, how has she not gotten killed off at this point? How is anyone able to tolerate her? Moving on to episode 8, the final episode. Starts off kinda jumpy. There's some romance that I wasn't really into, but it does slowly pick up when involving an execution, and it becomes sort of a race against time before someone is put in the electric chair and basically tortured to death. Charlotte makes another appearance, and I rolled my eyes and I was like, oh god, not her again. She is so irritating, and she's like a bad cold that won't go away. To my utter shock, she made for a great finale. Like, wow, this was really freaking good. And I loved the last half of this episode. And I'm actually considering watching season 2, despite not really liking the show overall. Overall, I give this a 4 out of 10. I may or may not watch season 2. One thing that really disappointed me was just the show in general and the way it was portrayed. I mentioned this earlier on in the video, but it does not feel like it's anywhere connected with the movie One Flew Over. It doesn't even seem like the same character because I just saw that movie, and the character in that movie doesn't seem like the same person as Sarah Paulson. I think Sarah Paulson was miscast. She really does not look like the original actress. I think someone like Mo Collins would have been a better choice, even though Mo Collins is a comedic actress. This just felt very disconnected from the original movie, and it was disappointing, although my expectations weren't that high to begin with because it was starring Sarah Paulson and Ryan Murphy was connected with this. And the last few seasons of American Horror Story have been extremely disappointing. And speaking of American Horror Story, this just felt like another season of American Horror Story. You could have advertised this as just the ninth or 10th season of American Horror Story and never mentioned the movie One Flew Over with Jack Nicholson, and it wouldn't have made a difference. It just seems like American Horror Story. Another thing I want to mention is that this shows female empowerment and feminism without losing the story and the focus. So I did think it did a good job in that way. So yeah, 4 out of 10.